Good morning. Welcome to Frank's School. This is the 5th year, 35th day, first video. And I want to pause. I've been filming outside, things I'm building, and I'll be doing that mostly this year, or much more than before. But I want to pause to say a couple things about the way I build. I never really formally studied architecture or engineering. So, you know, in a way, you might say, how dare I speak about this? I don't know, I dare. How I build? Well, in the first place, Batchbug. That's a word I created. Building a cheap but good, and I have videos on there. Batchbug bridge, Batchbug chimney, Batchbug this or that. A whole bunch of playlists. I may change it to Bilchbug because I sort of want it as a noun, I want to use it differently. In other words, building cheap but good. Building cheap but good building. That's the kind of building I do. Cheap, yes. With what I have at hand, spend as little money as possible. That's a form of recycling, really. And extreme recycling, as you've seen. But also good. Good. Very good. You know, the money you put out on something does not necessarily make it be good. It can be built very, very cheaply, but very, very good. That's what I try for. But and I've spoken about that before. But what I want to add, it was something sort of new. I was watching television in the middle of the night, a documentary. I've watched many about the Gothic cathedrals in Europe. And this time, and I knew what the man was talking about, but this time he used the word additive versus deductive construction. What he was referring to was that the Gothic cathedrals, this has, you know, been standing there for 1,000 years, some of them, but they were built without a blueprint. An engineer or an architect didn't draw it all out and say, here's what you built. No, they made a model. Very often they made models, and they started, and they built, and they learned as they went. The builders were the architects. They were the engineers of the time, and if something didn't work, well, they took it apart and built it better. He was talking about the flying buttresses in Notre Dame, Paris, as an example of something that solved a problem, and then it spread out. Well, it was that word additive. I thought, is that the name for that kind of building? I'm not sure it is actually. Additive. I'll study a little bit more. I've studied it already, but that's what this particular host in the show was using. Deductive, you plan it out, you think, you draw it, you think here's what it should be, and then you draw it and then you build it. That's deductive. Well, I don't make blueprints. In a way, I do that. Sometimes I'll actually make a little bit of a drawing, but not very much of one. And then I start to build. And since I never built, that's one of the things that's critical. When I build, I always build something that can be taken back apart. I don't use strong glue, if I use glue at all, very rarely. I don't really use mortar very much at all. I dry stack my things. I'll use nails that are double-headed so you can pull the nail back out. I sort of do that all the time because a lot of times I'll back up and I'll go a little bit further. So no plan, and examples here in this course in Frank's School would be the huts that I'm building. I still don't have a completely clear idea what they're going to look like when they're done. I have a sort of a plan, but I'm going to build according to principles. I mean, you can't just build foolishly. There are certain principles you've really got to obey. And so anyway, the huts would be an example of this kind of building. This furnace forge kettle place that I have just put online. When I started, I didn't really even realize there'd be a kettle place to it. I didn't know exactly what it was going to be looking like, but I sort of knew some of my limitations, and I began to build. And so it's additive as I'm learning, and I've taken it apart and rebuilt it. Now, and in a sense, the entire campus which in his 5th year I'm building of Frank's school, this village that I'm sort of restoring, but in the process creating all these little tiny buildings and stuff. That whole thing, in a sense, is additive. I don't have like a city planner's blueprint about how things are. In a sense, it's in the ground already from what was here 150 years ago. And as it reveals itself, I build around what's being revealed. Well, certain principles, I was saying, they're always there. Like I'm about to create five additional huts or whatever, and I've got to decide the location, exactly where will they be. They're going to be level. I'll have to establish plumb as I work. I'll have these square. I mean, these are such basic principles of most building. And then the idea of straight. Although straight very often conflicts with level. The village that was here was built square and straight. I would tend, if I were on a completely blank area, I would not worry so much about square and straight for layout. I would go with level. It's more important to me. And the gardens, and wherever there's water involved, then it's all about level and plumb. Well, that might just confuse you. But the other term that I wanted to use is this datum line. I actually found the term after I had discovered the principle. I build, well, let me go back here. Andy, who works with me all the time, he'll joke about, well, that's not what the blueprint said, or where's the blueprint? So we're building together. And of course, I don't make a blueprint. Well, my German friends, Shirley and I, we would argue or joke about this idea of, I was saying, I build often from the top down, not from the bottom up. And you know, they say, well, you can't do that. You have to start in the bottom and you build up. Well, yes and no. I mean, something, you can't have it floating in the air. But in principle, more often than not, I build from the center of a building outward, down, up, to the sides. And that's the way an airplane is built. Actually, that's where I found that. I thought there must be some principle for this. When you build an airplane, there's a certain line that goes right through the very center of the airplane out the back, an imaginary line. And off that line, every single screw, bolt, chair, window is laid off exactly where it's supposed to be from that line. It goes right through there, that single line in the inside. So there is building that's done that way, and it's called a datum line. Now, of course, that is not, well, that should not be additive construction. You know, there they've got the whole thing laid out. All right, so anyway, I build from the center outward. You might say I build inside out. And this furnace forge, if you've watched the videos, you've seen me do that. I started in the corner, and I'm building outward, and I'm still not sure at what point I'm going to stop with the kettle place. Sometimes I'm building from the top down. That is, well, often, all the time, because I'll establish the floor that you're going to walk on, and then from that establishment, how the height and stuff, I'll then go down to figure out, well, all right, how high does the wall have to be? How the individual legs, because the ground is sloping away. So from that level, I build down, and so my legs are all different. As opposed to, say, you excavate the whole thing, you create a plane that's perfectly level, and then you build up from there. Easier, in a way, to do what I just described, but involving so much more energy because of the excavation and all that. Well, I don't know if you followed me or not, but these are some things I felt that I should try to address. And very soon now, in the next few videos, I'm going to be going outside and walking around and looking at, in general, more at the things I'm building. All right, bye for now.